What we've learned, and you can take this to the bank, is that pursuant to the laws of this state, pursuant to the law in California, Nick Reiner is not guilty of murder. Print that. Print.
But now Nick Reiner is claiming that someone is out to get him. That is the latest headline. So let's talk about this. TMZ is reporting that someone close to the 32-year-old says that Reiner knows he killed his parents, Rob and Michele, but doesn't understand why he's in jail. According to TMZ, Reiner believes the people who put him behind bars are engaged in a, quote, conspiracy against him. Reports surfacing before the new year that Reiner had his medication changed or adjusted before the deaths of his mom and dad. But it remains unclear when that medication was, in fact, changed. So let's talk about this reported conspiracy theory, how it could impact the case. Many of us trial watchers invested in this case think we're going to see a case of not guilty by reason of insanity. If you listen to the way Alan Jackson phrased that, he said he's not guilty of murder, purposefully choosing his words. Many believe, you know, in order to put forward this particular defense. But will it fly? You know, you have to have expert testimony to say that you didn't know right from wrong at the time that the murders occurred. So let's discuss that. Let's bring in forensic psychiatrist Dr. Carol Lieberman and criminal defense attorney Mario Gallucci. Dr. Carol, starting with the mental state of this young man, you know, we know he's had lots of trouble with substance abuse. But we've heard very little. When we hear about him rehabbing, it was always rehab treatments, you know, for the substance abuse issues. We haven't heard anything about mental health struggles or him being, you know, hospitalized because of a lack of sanity. So what do you make of this coming up now?
Well, this case exposes the weaknesses of the mental health system. I mean, that is one of the problems. Yes, he was put in rehabs 17 or 18 times. And clearly they were focused on his drug abuse, not really his underlying problems. And whether that's the underlying psychological problems, you know, his emotions and so on, his childhood, his traumas and all of that, or whether it's his diagnosis. Now, the diagnosis seems to be schizoaffective disorder. And that was the first paper that I wrote when I was a chief resident at Bellevue. My first paper in a peer-reviewed journal was Schizoaffective Disorder Defies the Dichotomy and Keeps DSM-3 Pondering, meaning that schizoaffective disorder is you have the symptoms of schizophrenia, which include delusions and hallucinations, and affective, that means you have a mood disorder. So it's like bipolar. So it's a kind of combination of the two. And you can't actually be diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar, but if you have these symptoms that combine the two, it's schizoaffective disorder. And clearly this was missed during his rehabs and any other treatment he had. And there were so many places along the way that this could have been stopped. And I blame it on the mental health system.
Oh, that's an interesting take. Okay. Mario, so tell me, working with that as a defense attorney with schizoaffective disorder, has been reported as his diagnosis, is this something that you see as a viable defense, Mario, as a criminal defense attorney for Nick Reiner?
Oh, absolutely. The first thing I would do is hire Dr. Nancy Lieberman to evaluate him as an expert. I mean, the conspiracy theory he's discussing right now is part of the mental disease. He truly believes that he's part of a conspiracy. It shows a deterioration in his mental state. He's already got a diagnosis. He's been treated in facilities over 15 times. You know, a lot of times we see these individuals who are addicted to drugs, but they're using the drugs to treat the underlying mental condition. They don't understand that they have an underlying mental condition, and the drugs actually help them. So this was missed by the community of therapists and counselors that were hired, and they did recently change his medication. And that could be a big part of the defense here, that he was going along fine, and then a month ago, they changed his medication for whatever reason, and now he became more violent. We heard about the fight he had with his parents at Conan O'Brien's house. So, he was deteriorating at a very rapid rate, and nobody was able to really accommodate this. And it's tragic. It really is tragic. But this young man does suffer from a mental disease or defect, and absolutely that's going to be the defense.
Mario, thank you for that. Let's take a look at what's at stake for Nick Reiner. So in California, if you're convicted of doing a murder, you can be sentenced to life without parole. If you're found not guilty by reason of insanity for the crime of murder, then you're committed to a state mental hospital for an indefinite period of time. Potentially can be the rest of one's life. All depends on the progress that they make with treatment. So it's not that they walk free. It's just that they're committed to a state-run hospital to get the treatment they need. Dr. Carroll, back to schizoaffective disorder. Are these people who are afflicted with this generally violent people?
Not necessarily, no. Of course, if you hear voices, which is part of the schizo part, delusions and hallucinations, you could be hearing some voice telling you to kill somebody. But on the whole, no. And this is just a real, supposedly, yes, he had told a doctor, a psychiatrist, that sometimes there are side effects, and you need to be very careful about how you manage the medications. You need to find the ones that works for a particular patient. And so supposedly he was saying that he was gaining weight, and he didn't like a particular antipsychotic that he was on. But so what the psychiatrist did, to the extent that I'm aware of this, what the psychiatrist did was switch his medications. And you don't just get off one medication one day and then start another medication the other day. You have to taper off, and you have to gradually get on. And ideally, you put the person in the hospital, because if someone has a severe mental illness like schizoaffective disorder and a history of drug abuse, you don't do this out in the wild, give them another prescription and just send them on their way. Because this is a very dangerous time, a very unbalanced time, and that was another example. And this is of what's wrong with the mental health system. Psychiatrists have become pill pushers, and this is what they do. And I'm a psychiatrist, and I am appalled at my profession.
Yeah, well, appreciate the hot take, Dr. Carroll. I really do. Thank you for that. Yeah, because no doubt this issue will come up in this trial. Good defense attorneys like Mario are going to raise these kinds of issues. Mario, I want you to take a look at something that could become somewhat of maybe a little problem that the defense will have to deal with. Something that Nick Reiner said in the past when he went on the Dopey podcast. Here's the clip.
How'd you get Wellbutrin? Did it cop it on the street? The way I got Wellbutrin is actually really fun. I was at a Lena Lodge, and I don't know if I told this last week, but they refused to give me meds. So to prove I was crazy, because they were like, you don't need any meds. Yeah, and I was like freaking out. And I was like, you don't think I need meds? And they're like, yeah, we think you're just all up to an act here, and this is all just fake. And I said, okay.
Okay, fake being crazy to get the meds. Mario, how do you deal with that if you're his lawyer?
So I would say that's part of his delusion, that he's making this up, and it's part of his mental disease, a defect this schizoaffective disorder, and that he's making up these things in order to get his medication, in order to keep this delusion going. He's obviously suffers from this disease. This has been going on for years. He's been treated for years. There's been documentation that he's been treated by doctors for this, and he's been in rehab. So this is just one little blip on an otherwise, a person that suffers from a serious disease, a significant disease. As the doctor just said, this is not, I'm a little paranoid.
Right. This is a big deal. Mario, appreciate that. Dr. Carroll, appreciate all the insights you shared. We'll leave it here for now. We'll, of course, report any more updates we get on this big case that we know has rocked Hollywood and people all over the world that loved Rob Reiner's work. Our hearts to go out to his children, the loss of him and his wife, Michele.